Hi, and welcome back. I am intentionally saying welcome back because hopefully you've also been able to imbibe or partake in the first three videos because this is a series and we're going to be diving into yin and describing yin a little bit more. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Thought I would start with a short review of the prior episodes, what we're going to do in this one, and how it ties into the flow of the priors. So, in part one of Turn On is the Way, we talked about why Turn On is the way, what about Turn On specifically, or what kind of Turn On would be the way or a way. And in part two, we looked at a disposition oriented to yin, how turn on is the way has a yin variation. We're speaking to a receptive dynamic. Yin is another word for active reception, active surrender. And in part three, we talked about the language of dominance and submission then to get even more concrete. Whereas language around polarity can sometimes be abstract or a little unclear or bring a lot of cultural, gender, and other kinds of baggage or history that can make it confusing. The language of concrete dominance and submission. And we talked about a number of healthy versions that people encounter every day, like a massage, or usually in their life anyway, and the kinds that we're encountering in an unhealthy way already, politically, socially, etc. And that therefore, this bridge to the idea of dominance and submission and how done rightly, submission and yin brings restoration. It brings relief, it brings rejuvenation, it brings a feeling of openness and flow. And how we can then start to extend it to the realms of deeper forms of sensuality and sexuality, intimacy, and our erotic connection. And we actually can bridge them because we have a lot of understanding of what makes a good space of someone's space holding in a professional context or in a friendship context in all kinds of different areas. We can now extend that intelligence to this area so it doesn't feel like this other world or foreign universe that only some weird people are into. And it turns out to be a zone where we can get really clear and clean on consent,
Yeah.
safety, and consent to then create a space of flow.
Yeah.
And we talked about in the last one the fruit of which, done well, whether it's the theater or the massage or whatever, where a person feels light and free and open. But here we want to really track the arc of what happens when there's safety, when there's sovereign, ongoing consent that's attuned to, and then what happens in the yin process? What happens in the state of submission when it's done consciously, when it's done in a healthy way? What is the arc? What's the trajectory that eventually then leads to the result that we spoke about of that, like, oh, I feel so much lighter. Whew, I feel freer. I feel inspired. I feel like fundamentally restored and recharged and rejuvenated in life, versus the experience of so much anxiety, depression, burnout, fatigue.
Yeah.
That is all we talked about in the first two, emblematic or symptomatic of a society where yang is so over dominant in an unhealthy way and has been yin has been lost. And so this is a way that we can start to rejuvenate our beings and come back into life force. And that's how turn on is the way. So that brings us to where we are here.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and it's a conversation in a yang or masculine dominated or externalized performative societal milieu or just ecology that yin almost can't be discussed enough because it seems like it really just needs to be imprinted or tracked in for people to recognize the value of yin and why we might be hungry for it or seeking it, and why we might not recognize it as something that's safe for very good reasons, but to really start to create this beautiful dialogue around the nature of it being something that is incredibly healthy. And as a woman that identifies as a yin or a submissive, this can be so confusing in the initial parts because there's this assumption that I should know and I should be comfortable with these things. And it should be really clear to me because of my anatomy being organized in that way. And so this is going to harken back to some of the, like second episode, but it's going to deepen it and specifically speak to it in orientation to the reading it in a woman's body in this version, because it doesn't need to be in a woman's body as we spoke to in the other ones. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
So
So yes, to say that explicitly, thank you for mentioning that. Yin, not every woman is a yin.
yep,
Not every yin or submissive being is a woman.
yep,
And ultimately, as we've been saying in the prior ones, we actually really advocate for people to experience both sides and to really learn to, even if you're going to have a preference in, the person might have a preference in the zone of sensuality and intimacy and sexuality. Anybody can go get a really great massage and go be submissive for a while and have somebody else hold the space, or anybody can go to a concert or listen to a talk or be engrossed in a movie. Like, submission in this sense in yin is restorative for all beings. And certainly if someone is more, like for example, speaking more on my side, is more on the dominant side relative to sensuality and sexuality and intimacy, it is important to have legitimate, deep experience of what it is to be held. What is a good kind of space holding? When do you actually feel attuned to? When do you actually get to have feedback as a sub that's taken into account and then is part of the process and actually deepens agency and deepens connection and deepens trust and safety? If one is going to be on the other side, it's very helpful to learn to be in the other role and therefore to have an embodied experience of what it's like. Oh, this is what it's like to be in a submissive state. Okay. If I'm going to be in the more dominant state, I need to know that not conceptually, but in a deeply experiential way to know the level of responsibility and care that's then involved.
yeah, which leads us to bring up the inevitable discussion of safety, which also can't be spoken about enough, is the necessity of safety. Safety comes first, safety comes second, safety comes third. That's really
Safety,
been
safety, safety. Yeah.
yeah. So, it just from in there's lots of conversations about that in other episodes. What we could say in this one is like, let's talk about safety as a felt sense of experience in the body and something that we can track for in the body. And one of the things that I like to remind myself as a mother of a son is this thing where I've observed a multitude of times, which is he cannot learn if he doesn't feel safe because it's a primary necessity. So for him to be able to integrate information at school, for just one of the examples that I found was like, I first needed to make sure, like, did he feel safe in the environment that he was in, which reminded me of all of the times that I didn't feel safe in the environment of my education. And just to recognize the priority of safety is like a really beautiful thing to recognize, allows for integration, transformation, healing. At times it could be this expression of healing that occurs. We're not suggesting that you're following those intentions. What we're saying is if you have safety, amazing things can happen. And for a woman, or for this description of a yin experience in a woman, this is such a great dialogue to be having and to bring into the place, because unconsciously a lot of the time it's not expressed that women expect men to offer them safety, or there's this kind of constant it shows up a lot in the coaching that I do with women, where there's this place where it's like, I don't feel safe with him, or he doesn't make me feel safe. And I would like to, that's fine. That all of that is good information to have if you understand that. But what I'd like to know is, can you feel safety in yourself? Can you be the one that cultivates safety in yourself? Can you track for safety as something that you're personally responsible for? And that safety comes before desire. So when we understand ourselves safely, then we can access our desires and be a safe one to access our desires, which, as we will find as we go through this series, is a really important part. So safety allows the body to open. It allows the channel to open. You cannot force that. And the great understanding of yin, or the feminine body, is to recognize that it's cyclical in its nature, that there's a process that's occurring that is a yin process. It's not like a yes, no. There are elements of yes, no that we can speak to, but like that there's like this kind of rising and filling that occur in relationship. If safety is there, if safety is like the yes is there, if the experience is there, if the relaxedness is there, there's lots of cool places to go. Yeah. So there's, should we talk a little bit about pacing maybe from that spot? Yeah. So safety first. Safety, safety, safety. When there's safety and you can track for safety, there's a lot more clarity. But ultimately, the next thing is pacing. So yin arousal is a slowed down pacing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if turn on is the way, and we're talking about the empowered, submissive version of turn on is the way, the yin version, which again is receptive. And receptive does not mean passive, it means the act of receiving. And this is a huge point. And so if someone gives a like a nice, wanted, warm hug, let's just use a very simple example that way. Someone's having a tough moment and they say, "Can you just hold me? Can you just give me a hug?" And they get wrapped up, they get held, and it's wanted. It's not somebody grabbed them or it's not like feeling rigid, but it's a nice, strong, and yet soft around the edges, firm but connected form of hugging and holding. What happens for that person? They immediately start to go, and maybe they have some tears if they're sad or if they're feeling some big feelings or overwhelm. But that person will go into themselves. They won't have to be, it's different than two people hugging each other and having a nice, sweet co-hug. That's lovely too. But we're talking in this case where we're playing with a little bit of polarity. One's going to be more the hugger and one's going to be the huggy, the hugged, right? And the one who's the receiving and the receptive state goes inwardly. They're going to receive someone else holding them. Not that they're going to hold back as well. In this moment, they're just actually going to get held. And then they go slowly within. And in that case, that's more of a kind of comforting holding. If we're wanting to talk about a little more spicy and have a little more of that flavor to it, same basic idea with a slightly different vibe, which is that they're going to need to feel safe and they're going to need to feel that that holding energy, literal and or figurative, is strong and yet somehow enveloping. Not strong in a grippy way, not strong in a with like clingy or agenda driven, but just really clear, present holding. And then they're going to start, if they go inwardly, and if it's safe for them to do so, and if they choose to do so, there's the sovereign point. They don't have to, it's not forced, it's an invitation. They can say yes, and they can also pause and continue to say yes, or yes, only so much. But if they do that, then this process will start in the body of a yin oriented version of arousal, which is, as you were saying, more it oscillates. It starts to kind of become rhythmic and it starts slowly and it's meant to build. And it's not about, okay, now they're turned on, now let's go do the other thing. it's actually stays entirely within its own lane the whole time and just starts to build in this slow cook, slow burn kind of way, which is what allows for so many zones of intimacy. It allows for it to have consent at each and every point. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't have a hierarchy of you're supposed to get to this point and this is better and this is worse. Every experience becomes whole and in a now state and in a flow unto itself. So it could simply be cuddling in this way. It can be deeply erotic. It can be kissing, eye gazing, hand holding, gentle, loving touch. And each of these zones becomes now, as you said, like filled with eros rather than mechanically from a dissociated state enacted, whether with clothes on or with clothes off.
Yeah. Yeah, this is I feel like a great space to be speaking to for those who want to participate in being in the role of dominance and want to understand how to do this in a really healthy and connected way. And I'm saying this because I primarily work with women in this coaching realm. And when they start to understand themselves, then it can be this sort of jarring sense of like, I feel like masculine or men or yang are misinterpreting or misreading. And when I interview or speak to my masculine young, expressing dominant male friends, they ask for the checklist. They ask for like the so just break it down for me. Like what do I need to do that then leads to the next step that then leads to next step because I really want to do this well and I really want to make sure that I'm safe and I really want to make sure that she has a good time and I really want to make sure that I don't skip ahead or whatever. So if you could just make it make sense for me in this way that feels safe for them, I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to do a great job. They're trying to show up. And what was like dawning on me is this realization of like, oh, there's a very different process that moves at a very different pace, which if you don't have patience or attunement, can be really confusing to read. And it might seem like nothing's happening, or it might seem like, oh no, I'm failing, or she needs me to lead in some way. And then that can almost feel like overstepping or pushing or urgency. And so this naming this place of like it's slowed down, it unfolds through like this trust, not urgency. There's this space of like connection and trust that starts to lead to this filling. And there's really great data that if you're trained to look for it is there. It's like some stuff that you want to
Great
be looking
data.
for.
Really great data.
Yeah. So elements of reading the pleasure body as it arises or elements of reading the feminine body we're going to speak to help people understand. So if you're oriented in your yin body, you also know that you can communicate these to the other person. And it's not that you have to, but like it can be really helpful to have another person when they're reading you and they're looking for that information to be able to express it and have permission to express it because it feels safe and because it actually feels like it'd be helpful for your pleasure or your experience of your pleasure to share that. Um, should we just like dive into a couple examples of it? Or yeah, like breath being one. Like there'll be a way that we breathe in our body when we don't feel safe. It'll be like apical and up at the top of the lungs, or short, or sort of like this place where you want to look for when it shifts over. If it's not there, you want to look for kind of elements of like a sigh or a big exhale or even a dropping down in the tone of the voice. Yeah, you're moving in that way. It'll have like this sort of cat-like movement that happens in the space of like moving towards the feminine tracking or the expression of yin tracking in a way that element of arousal is starting to fill. The voice will drop down lower and there'll be this speaking from the heart or speaking from the hoo-ha is the place that I
Mhm.
like to describe it. And when there's an urgency or an experience of expectation from the other, it'll be like across the top. And like you'll see a yin or a submissive or a person that is oriented in this way, they'll be really in their head and they'll be kind of like trying to speak and clarify these things and it'll be popping along the top. So just to sort of like recognize, like there'll be like this,
Mm.
that is a good sign. That is a good indication of trust. There's yumminess as a noise is a really good one, like what you just did there. That like growling yummy noises, people will start to make them. You can find this in conversation anywhere, actually, when somebody's like agreeing with you, or like you get yummy's a good thing to look for in conversation or connection where there's attunement, is like those elements of like it's like I'm digesting a food that I'm really enjoying, and so that communicates the pace of the yin filling and arousal. Warmth or flush, like the cheeks flushing, the elements of circulation coming to the one of the we spoke to this in the very first video, is like there's a lot of humanity that's actually in fixed frozen or sort of a functional freeze state, and their face will have this sort of pallor, sort of like there's not really a lot of brightness to them. There's like a flatness in the eyes. That's actually that they're in and like have been living in a state of unconscious shutdown for a while. So when like shut down goes to turned on, there's things that you look for, and it looks like a luminosity, or it looks like this brightness that comes through. When a person's turned on, they become more bright, they become more radiant. Yeah, yeah. What else would you name that are things that you can notice and look for?
Especially when there's touch, even just again, like to the arms, or we're not immediately into, fully sexual touch, but just sensual touch, even is the touch being received? Are they like, if it's like, around the shoulders or the upper arms or something, it's like, does it feel rigid, or does it feel like it's like, yeah, it's
Right.
like Gumby or something? Like it feels like, meh, like ragdolly? Or does it feel like, what for the one who's in the more dominant position, if they're holding, do they feel that they're being received? Do they feel the other person's skin like, oh, that feels good? And then again, the combination of them, it's like the touch, and then the body relaxes, and the yummy sounds made, or the breathing changes. You got, a couple of them going, you're getting some good signaling here.
Yeah, yeah,
And at the beginning, verbal part is certainly beginning, and for as long as wanted, actually, is also part of it. Does this feel good? At some point,
yeah,
if someone's wanting to go more inwardly and become more submissive, they are generally gonna like want less of the mind energy and less explicit speaking, usually,
yeah,
not always. And then so consent and tracking at that point tends to be more. They can still pop out anytime and say time out or whatever if something's not quite right. But as much as possible, they don't want to like, well, does this feel good? Okay, well, does this feel good? Well, does
right.
this feel good? Does this feel good? Like, I'll just go off here, and then that's not going to create slow down and safe. But so over time, it's like tracking for like the breathe, as you're saying, the breathing, the energy, the movement of the body. They might start to go through kind of spontaneous, like you're saying, cat movements, or the hips might start moving, or all of a sudden their like shoulders are opening up, and then there's breathing, and they might go more inwardly, and you can sense the energy turning more inward.
Mhm.
That's a sign that they're feeling safer to go within.
Yeah,
And again, by orienting this from a yin way, it's not okay, now they're turned on. Okay, now's the moment to switch gears. No, it's the whole time is to stay in this more deepening, spiraling, circular, slow down. And for each time that flame gets stronger and that it's slowed down, is like breathe into that new layer. Enjoy it, savor it, relish it. Like each experience in each zone is whole unto itself.
yeah,
This for me was the huge learning, or one of the hugest learnings was thinking that the point was to get turn on to then go into the agenda zone. That's how I had been entrained. That's how pretty much everybody's entrained.
pretty much
And
everybody.
that's even assuming there's even the turn on part is that's kind of optional, but at least ideally that's might be referenced. But to say, no, 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 the point is actually to stay in turn on
Hmm.
and actually just to keep sitting with it and watch it like of itself deepen. Your point earlier about for the women clients saying, like he doesn't turn me on is like, and then he thinks, or the Dom or whoever it is thinks their job is to turn them on. The other person thinks their job is the other person to turn them on and it's
Yeah.
working or it's not working
Hmm.
versus like turn on is life flowing through someone's being.
Yes.
I don't turn anyone on. You create a Dom creates really good space that if the other person chooses to, they choose to immerse and sink into the part of them that's always turned on and is always turning on more deeply.
It's a really, really critical thing that you just named because in working with women primarily, I've seen this show up a number of times where it's like, he doesn't turn me on and he's supposed to turn me on. I don't know what it's like in the masculine expression as much. I know that that conversation does come up, or am I no longer turned on by my partner? So that's a different conversation. But relative to the yin and the yin body, this shows up both in that expression where it's like he's supposed to be a certain way, and then I'll be able to access my turn on. So that's not what we're saying. This is a personal self responsibility thing that occurs when there's safety. And I'm going to touch on that in a second. But the other side of this is this place where it can be this resentment against like, how dare he turned me on and I feel seduced, or it's some sort of like, oh, he took me to turn on and I wasn't wanting to go to turn on. Like it's like somebody has power over you to that degree. And I would just invite, are you aware that you're giving that level of power away to somebody? And if you want to do that, do it consciously and have fun with it. And if you don't want to and it's happening, grab that power back and take a look at that unconscious behavior that shows up, because it is rampant in our society. And this place of like personal responsibility and agency around our turn on and shepherding it authentically is like really where we need to start with it. So then we can come back to the pacing and sort of the elements of the pacing. And you touched on it. I just want to expand on that further, which is this place of like, if you're playing the role of the dominant and you're creating the space, like the hug or the spaciousness for the comfort to occur and be there. And that can look like something like you extend your hand to somebody, did they take it? Or that element of like there's an approach that is like you can read and start to learn from the levels of approach and what's there in the receptive side. Is it flat? Is it clammy? Is it grabby? Is it grippy? Like just those elements of like there's all of these subtle nuances that are going on. And my question to people that want to play this role of the yang or the dominant or in this expression is, do you feel safe? Because if you don't feel safe and you're questioning yourself and you're constantly like, are you safe? Are you checking in? Are you good? Is this good? Are you enjoying this? Like that sort of staccato thing, she might be rolling on into like, I say she is like just, the pronoun that applies in my expression. She might be rolling into this expression of like filling, and you're pulling her out of it and into her head where now she's got to be like, am I turned on? I mean, I think, am I not communicating this properly to him? Like, so there's this element that is really beautiful. That is it's an art form. If you didn't get it, that's a lot of what Chris and I teach people and help people. Or maybe you're masterful in it, you don't even really realize that you're masterful in it, and you're wanting to kind of deepen into it. This is something that we help people work with, these layers of it. And not everybody had safe contact with their upbringing in their body, and so it's not uncommon for this to be such a juicy place for those hitches to start to show up. And that's not wrong either. It's an invitation for a bit of refinement, and that if you're very polarized, that's a good thing. But it also means you have to do a translation energetically about what's happening. And so one of the things that you spoke to is this space holding that's like enveloping and spacious. And then there's a lot of like organically, what it does is it creates a space of safety, because I now can experience containment within that energy, whether I recognize it consciously or unconsciously. Then my body will start to move in accord with the pulse of feminine rising energy, that yin rising tide of energy. And we don't want to push that with any sort of agenda, even though it can feel kind of like, oh, I need I need to lead it. And so this is an important part is actually you kind of want to wait for her or the yin or in this experience for them to feel themselves and then to move more towards it. So as the tide rises, as the tide rises, there'll be information that you'll get like sounds, like the movement, sort of this like widening in the breath, widening in the movements, like softening, opening the heart, the shoulders roll back. There'll be kind of like these undulations that are natural as a part of the chest and the shoulders. These are indications of safety within the system. They're indications of turn on, of like the energy moving. It's not necessarily like it's just like it's not so easy to describe these elements as like a clear sort of like that's a yes, now jump on it. That's not what we're saying at all. Is like getting a yes actually means you come in for another yes and then you come in a bit more for another yes, and so it's like elements of like looking for that dance in polarity and looking for like what that healthy magnetism looks like, and that it is a bit of a dance. So to be able to come into contact with that pressure in your own sensitive awareness of what is that dance of contact and where are the elements of um, implicit yes or an invitation for more in sound, in movement, and then from that space a little bit more but then waiting, and then like a little bit more and then waiting, because the yin pacing is deliciously slow. And worst case scenario, she starts to beg for more. I mean,
Worst case. Such a terrible.
terrible thing. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's for those who want to be in the dom role, whatever their orientation, whatever their biological sex, gender identity. If you want to be in the dom role more often, if you want to just every once in a while switch and you're the kind of person who's usually more submissive, but every so often you like flipping it around. Whatever the case is it's important to say that this is dominance from the perspective of the yin and the lead, actually. Or at least not maybe the lead, but more like this is dominance that is oriented to yin, not its dominance. And then we have some like consent officially for yin or submission inside of what is otherwise essentially a predominant yang system. Those are out there. And even a lot of the, as we've talked about, a lot of the women's sexual empowerment stuff is still essentially a yang version of how to become sexually empowered as a woman. And this yin idea is both for the subs and the doms, actually. It's not just, oh, I'm just trying to, as a dom, learn that language so I can more or less do what I was already doing already with just a little tweak here or there, but actually a fundamental overhaul really deeply and powerfully is like, so this yin circling, spiraling, deepening rhythm and oscillation is the one that you actually just stay with. Not we did that, okay, now we're at some other place. Now we can jump on them, as it were, as you said. But instead, like, what happens if you just completely stay with this rhythm?
Mhm.
And it is quite marvelous and magical.
Mhm. I was just casting an eye to the notes that you wrote earlier, and I love this word oceanic, because I feel like oceanic, it implies a couple of things: the bigness of the ocean, as well as the tide and the tidal elements, and feminine. In my yin experience, we orient to the moon. It's a really great teacher of like there's this cyclical nature of feminine that can sometimes be confounding to understand when you're an expression of a linearity or masculinity or a yang expression, because it's inherently linear. It's like this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. And then yin comes along and it's like, I am a whole new creature in this next moment, and is like, what the heck is going on? I really want to do a great job, but she just changed. And so just to also recognize, like, there can be that rising tide, and then that tide can start to go down, or it can start to go inward more, and things get quiet, and it can look like, oh no, I'm losing her, or oh, she's not turned on anymore. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So we want to like name these parts of like, there's this element of the rising tide that if you start to get really good at working with these elements of these tidal natures without having that agenda of getting somewhere, and if you have an agenda of getting somewhere, just name it and understand it for yourself. I have an imprint of this is what it looks like. This leads to this, leads to this, leads to me getting off, and I feel better, and I just want to get to that place. That's fine if you have that imprint. That would make you part of 99% of society, or something like a crazy amount, a crazy high amount of that. The thing that we're proposing is this element of like, can you play with the yummy and be in the space of the yummy and the connection, and then wait for the empowered submissive to lead from underneath. There's like the wait for the tide to lead you from underneath as like a place to track for, to create an awareness around. If this doesn't make sense to you yet, that's okay. This develops over time. For a lot of people, is coming to a space where they can recognize how to create that safe environment for the tide to rise, and then the elements of like how it comes in and out, and then that is actually such a beautiful expression of feminine and yin that might not be something you know to look for.
Yeah, because even as we were saying, whether it's the stuff that goes under the label of sexual empowerment, maybe primarily towards women or not exclusively, or even some of the better sex stuff,
Right.
it's like, this is science will show you that this is better sex.
Totally.
And it's probably better sex than the sex people are having otherwise. Like, of course, it's like, it's a step in the right direction. But this is, again, back to this idea of like the side of the moon that's simply reflecting the sun's light, which is basically what we're talking about here. It's like better sex within a scientific framework, so-called, or um, sexual empowerment, maybe for women, but it's still pretty young. That's like at best the sun reflecting onto the moon. We're talking about the other side of the moon. We're talking about the dark side of the moon.
Yeah.
And there's a whole other zone of arousal, intimacy, pleasure. You were talking there about oceanic experiences of bliss and the body being like permeated and breathed by ecstasy that does not look like what people may assume it does from a more yang oriented, whether it's from movies or pornography or wherever, where it's supposed to go crescendo-y and it's supposed to kind of go pow, and then there's depletion afterwards. Instead, it goes deeper and it becomes like tectonic plates shifting and quaking, and it's more like rumbly, and it doesn't automatically lead to a it has to be to some crescendo that then is a denouement. Like it actually can just build on itself and reverberate and resonate. And it's just a totally different experience um, that will lead to, on the far side of it, profound restoration. That experience we were talking about in the last one of like the really nice massage or whatever, and then feeling like uplift and rejuvenation. It's that on just a whole other level
Yeah.
because we're tapping this really deeply untapped reservoir of potential rejuvenative energy and life force.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hence, they get all shiny, hence, they get all glowy and luminous and radiant,
Yeah.
which of course just makes the one who admires them and adores them want them more. So there's the
They really
there's
want
the positive feedback cycle,
Yeah.
right? That it's like, oh wow, that's even more alluring and more attractive, and more luscious and yummy and juicy. Yeah.
Yeah. You spoke to this part earlier with the hug analogy, and it's really nice to just normalize these, expressions of like love and the way that we relate to each other and gesturing. And what can happen when there's a safety gesture is that tears might be released. And so this is another indication of like health and safety, is that emotions that have not been previously safe to experience will start to show up. Sometimes those are really big emotions that you were not anticipating. And that place can seem like I'm failing in some way, or seem like I'm dropping the ball on safety. And it couldn't be further from the truth, actually, is like when somebody feels themselves and they feel like they're able to express fully, that's an incredible compliment to the level of safety and space holding that you're holding. It'd be just noticing for yourself, like when I give somebody a hug and then they have tears, do I immediately feel like, oh, it's okay, don't cry, like sort of that
Gotta fix them.
like
Yeah.
gotta fix that there's an emotion happening. And this is a great space to recognize within yin, within the reflection of like, say, Sarah, how are you feeling today? That invitation allows me to go into my experience, see how I'm feeling. When I start to access my feeling body, feelings come out. Feelings that have been repressed or unsafe to experience come out. And it's a really helpful thing to understand that this is a healthy expression of yin, is that level of unacknowledged exhaustion might show up that then leads to shaking, it leads to crying, it leads to noises that are not words. They're just expression that is communicating my animal body is something I am with in this moment. I really like comparing the feminine experience of the body of a woman to like the wildness. Can we talk a little bit about sanctuary? Yeah,
Please.
I thank you. I really, I found in my studies of teaching feminine empowerment, the word sanctuary was really helpful for people to understand the nature of yin. And so in this languaging around the word sanctuary, it's a place that we can go to for restoration, is sort of what is described. So yin is a place where you can go to for restoration, or you can experience a place where you're protected in some way from an external. So if you were to say you wanted like sanctuary from an external um, warring experience and you're looking for sanctuary in a church, or if you're in an outer world and there is this aggressive place that you don't feel safe in some way, your nature, your impulse is going to be to look for sanctuary so you can restore yourself. I can't fight. I can't run away. I need sanctuary in this movement. So that's a healthy recognition of what's going on in our body, and to reclaim sanctuary as, like, we also speak about this in terms of nature, where we might have a nature sanctuary where we've delineated a part of a park that is specifically for birds to find their way back into their normal nesting impulses, back into their relationship with wild water, and the way that the water is not having people track through it and disrupt it. So that we know sanctuary in terms of the wildness of sanctuary. And there's also this really beautiful way of understanding yin in this expression of sanctuary. Whereas a yang, you're like, I am trying to get back into sanctuary. I am trying to come back to a place of restoration. For me, understanding the word sanctuary helped me come to a place of claiming the worth and the value of my vessel as a sanctuary. So am I safe for myself? Am I the one that's like creating a clear space of safety for me? And then if I am, holding, wow, that is an incredibly restorative thing that I'm offering both to myself and potentially other people as well. So I really enjoy looking at yin from that like slight nuance around sanctuary. Um, Replenishing, digesting, the nature of how it actually helps the tissues restore themselves. There's like an anatomical side of like coming back to the organic processes that are cyclical, that don't just happen because we make them happen. They go back into a restoring pacing that is organic. And you can't name a woman's vessel or the expression of a feminine body without naming, like, there's cycles that go on within this that mean that there's a wildness and an unpredictability to the nature of it, unless you start to sit there and observe, wow, where is the she, again, I'll use this pronoun, in this process of her cycle and her cyclical nature. And when you start to pay attention to nature, whether you're doing this as, somebody that's a gardener or a farmer, or somebody that is like observing it in the biology of a feminine or a yin, there's ways that you can see there's an organic intelligence that's already here. And I don't need to make it be any different than it is. I can just tap into it. And when we start to recognize that we can tap into that pulse, it is so much power. There is so much power in yin. And we live in a world that has prioritized yang as the place of power. And I really care deeply about bringing this back into the dialogue of yin empowerment being the place of like, there's a power in feminine yin expression or this nature expression. And sanctuary helps people maybe understand that imprint a little bit more.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, your point about the inherent dignity of your being, and that sanctuary is a word that for you helped illuminate the profound blessing and power and agency and gifting of your being, I think really deserves underscoring. And and again, this is true. We've been talking primarily through the lens of female anatomy as a instantiation or incarnation of this yin principle, but it doesn't only live. So if there's a male, if there's a man who is more principally oriented in a submissive way, and again, they will have their own arc that will be mostly the same with some slight nuances and diversity and variation, totally allowed, of course, but they too may have plenty of experiences of it wasn't safe to be male submissive. There can be all kinds of cultural issues there for sure. And so, for such an individual, when they're safe and held, they could be gay, they could be with another man, they could be bi, they could be straight. They might want a woman who's the female dom and they want to be submissive as a male in a heterosexual way. I mean, the opportunities and possibilities are, you can get mix and match any kinds of genders and orientations that we'd like to. But the point is the same arc's going to happen in its own diverse, expressed way, which is going to be times of incredible deep yes and like, oh, this is what this feels like. Oh, I'm coming home to myself. Oh, wow, this is working. Oh, this is amazing. I'm going inward. Like the other person's holding me. This is incredible. And then all of a sudden, poop, a big pop, like a pocket of turbulence, or all of a sudden numbness
Hmm.
or grief for like all the times that it wasn't safe to be that the way they were supposed to be,
Yeah.
or anger and resentment and rage about all the opportunities that didn't allow them to unfold organically in a way that would be more attuned and aligned to their being. So rage can come out, grief can come out, all of a sudden deep yeses, and then all of a sudden a pocket of boop, they go temporarily. They hit a space that was a little too deep, and then it revealed there was a pocket of some numbness down there. Then it's another pause. That's why this slowed down rhythm is so important, so that when those pockets of turbulence, when that stuff that kinks in the hose that need to get worked out, they have space to be digested so that we can all be, whether on the dominant side or the submissive side, present, here, present moment, embodied, and open to the mystery and the eros of each moment, and not either trying to hold back or reacting to undigested experience from the past.
Yeah. Yeah. And a person will go to the degree of safety you provide. So if they are able to access that, then that means that there's a safe space for it. And they might not even have known that it was in there, often is the case. That was my case. That was the experience as a massage therapist, also, is like there would be this energy that would start to move in the body. And there was confusion that came up with it because all of a sudden they were angry and they don't know why. They didn't know why they were angry, or all of a sudden there's this huge amount of grief, or this other thing that can happen which is elation or laughter, when there's like sort of, I don't know what I'm experiencing right now, but I do know that I'm allowed to laugh. I'm allowed to have this nervous laugh. So that would show up a lot where there's sort of this like hysteria of like a part of the physical anatomy has been offline or frozen, and now it's starting to soften and move, is becoming conscious within, like mechanically actually becoming, the molecules are moving within the blood and then becoming digested or aware of in the brain. So there's that side of it, but then there can also just be this expression of like you were saying, it hasn't been safe, and there's a younger part of me that's an imprint that is coming alive, pre-verbal. So elements of like, there might be parts of my life that now that the energy is turned on and moving, and I wasn't met in some way as a baby, that can come out now. It's like seeking to make a resolution in that arc, and that is a really beautiful thing to hold space for. And it looks scary if you don't know what's happening. It can look like, oh no, I failed, I've dropped the ball, she's ragey at me, or he's ragey at me, or there's this sort of seeming like out of space emotionality that starts to show up. That it's like, if you don't have that teaching, then that's fine. That is normal to start to want to learn these things or these elements. And I would say it's not as much of a problem as we sometimes can feel like it is in our perfectionist, performative sexual connection library of like experiences that we're allowed to have or not allowed to have. That it's like, no, there's a rupture and screw her, I don't want the drama, or whatever it is. Like, that's normal for all of these things to show up. It's something that Chris and I run into often in speaking and working with people. um, I want to propose that these elements of that awareness, or that freeze coming into thaw, is an indication of health, and that there's a way of working with it and integrating it and digesting it and having it be like a safe space, as well as there can be this experience of ecstatic bliss that shows up that you've never experienced before, where your like body is being breathed by bliss, and you've never had that level of openness, or you've never had that level of um, just like that connectedness to your body and your being, or this experience that's beyond. Maybe you've been searching for a relationship with spirit or source energy or ecstatic awakening, and you've been looking for it outwardly, and then the awe shows up, and that also can be really confusing for people with just like, what is this? I'm a messiah, I'm a, like
Right,
all of these
whatever.
sort of elements of like, yep,
Or
we
eventually
started.
it'll arc and it'll finish, and then it's like, oh my God, how do I get back there? And I lost it. And I saw the
Yes.
heavens and the angels are singing,
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. That sense of, yeah, take me back to the angels singing, or that space of like, no, we'll like show you. Turn on is the way is going to lead you to a lot of potentially spaces where that has not been the case. But just to kind of like start to get the sense of like, this is a really amazing experience that humanity has access to, that we might have seen under all kinds of different headings as unsafe, or as not successful, or as like a failure or a rupture in uh, a, a communication between two people. And I've had experiences like that where I've gone into like a shutdown or like a shame spiral, or an experience where it's like the energy that I connected into in my being was too much for me to articulate and understand. And that was the case with the other person too. And so we broke up, or we had this like experience where there was no like reconnect as to what happened within that, because there was too much shame or too much um sense of like the ego being disturbed in such a way that it didn't feel safe to connect with that person, or it didn't feel safe for them to try to understand what it could be looked like in a new way. So again, there's like, I want to map out to people, this landscape can look like so many different things that, you know, I would argue that none of us were taught, or many of us weren't taught in our upbringing. But we'd like to propose that there's like really beautiful ways to work with this that are digestible, they're healthy, they lead to like this natural finishing of the arc, which is a great thing, which happens to have like this restorative healing nature to it. That's all it's just yin force moving through. It's just the restorative nature of sanctuary as it resets us. And yeah, anything else you want to share? We'll let people kind of connect to the show notes and reach out if they have any questions. And
The point you were sharing there, I think of one of the potential states or um, scenarios that can arise is conditioning that in a shame-based way would argue that being a submissive this way is selfish. This is a big one. It can show up for anybody. There's usually a little bit more, if I'm speaking broadly, cultural conditioning for women this way. But it could show up for anyone really yin who's wanting to be submissive. Am I actually being given permission? Or isn't like on one level a shame, another of like, this can't actually be real. This must just be another ploy. And it's just a more, uh, underhanded or secretive way. And the idea is no, actually, that's one of the ones that'll be have to be found is the shame of like, is it actually okay to just go into your own ecstasy and pleasure
Yeah.
if you're on the submissive side
Yeah.
and actually let somebody else hold the space? And would they really actually be enjoying themselves to fully just be there, be radically present, adore, be present to, connected to someone undergoing ecstatic bliss and that be the way of them connecting and that be completely fulfilling for them too. It's
Mhm.
another huge one that will show up of the like, gotta perform, gotta please the other one, gotta do something to make them feel good. And oh my God, am I really allowed to just keep going in and just have more and more bliss? I must be selfish. It must be right. And this is another one that's pretty well inevitable given cultural conditioning. And again, to be able to name it, have a laugh about it, make it lighthearted, talk about what to do if and when, or more likely when that's going to occur in this way. So it's just made part of it. And once it can be dealt with and moved through and might come back around a few times, but at some point it kind of like is like, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. This is fun. Let's just do this thing. Um, then that's another one that gets to move through and again it like has these healing effects as you were saying without being that being the focus.
Totally. Yeah, totally. When it's clarified too that one person's yin and one person's yang, then one of the things that can show up is yang can be like, oh, I want to be that actually. I want to be that. And I didn't realize I wanted to be that. And so I was like playing the role of whatever it was unconsciously, but actually what I want to do right now is I want to be ravished. A good word to use that helps people understand is like, do you want to ravish or do you want to be ravished? Because it's kind of neutral in that sense of like, you can kind of be like, oh yeah, I want to be the meal or I want to be the eater, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
And you can switch. That's the whole point. You
it's
can
switch.
it's
You
like
can totally switch. Like that's, yeah, it doesn't make you
both ways are fun. Both ways are really sweet and loving in different and but complementary ways.
yeah. And they tend to lead to clarification when you really start to be like, hang on, if the shame piece shows up for receiving and taking all of the energy and sort of like, this has never been safe for me before, or now I'm just going to be in receiving, this is the place to do it. This is the space where it's such a funny thing where you actually, when you're the space holder, you're like, yeah, I actually just want you to take up the space. Like, I really just want you to go into your journey. I've shared in other videos and times where I've dated women where I came to this recognition of like, oh, if I'm the dom or if I'm the space holder or I'm the ravisher, I really want her to just go in and have a great time. I'm not like sitting there like looking at my watch being like, is it happened yet? Is it done? It's like, it's really, everything is about that space. And so I didn't know that. I didn't give myself permission to fully open to that prior to being able to negotiate both elements of the yang and the yin expression. So these are really great, helpful points when you're wanting to recognize that within intimacy, there's like an artfulness to intimacy, and there's the lay of the land and the artfulness of intimacy that can lead to really beautiful, sublime human experiences. And they're more accessible than I think people realize. And they do not need to be like penetrative sex or sex period or any like that. We're talking about this sense and sensibility where, yeah, we're including erotic elements of it because you really start to learn quickly, right? People are like, you got my attention now. But I just want to name this other part of like, in most of my experience, this is like clothes on, like elements of playing with the natures of these energies in a really subtle way where you start to become quite masterful at working with safety in the nervous system leads to this really beautiful connected way of being, and connection between humans leads to safety and intimacy being something that just is so restorative. And that's the yin nature of life rising up in us. And it's available to everybody.
Amen.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Chris.